Imagine being one of these dolts at Princeton or Columbia or Yale who actually celebrated Yahya Sinwar and then mourned his death. Imagine being one of the people who knew of Hassan Nasrallah years afterwards, after he had killed hundreds of American troops in the Beirut bombings in the 80s, after killing hundreds of allies of ours. Imagine that this man who said that his life's work would be to show that he loved death more than the Jews and the other infidel loved life, and he would use that against all of us non-Islamists. Imagine that you discovered that man before he was then killed by an IAF missile in Beirut. Imagine you discovered that man and you thought he was your guy. And then when he died, you thought he was my guy. This is one of the most appalling moral crossroads a person could be at. And there are plenty of chest-beating, pseudo-tough guys on social media and so on who like to say things like, how can you justify what the IDF is doing in Gaza? I say very easily, actually, because I've seen it all. I've seen it all up close. I've seen how it works. I've seen the devastation. I've seen the army's attempt to respond to the devastation. But I think that the question, a much bigger question, which of course is not asked as much, is simply, how could so many people who thought that they were the good guys?
Murray exposes the raw truth. This isn't a simple war. It's a billion-dollar terror network funded by Iran. Armchair generals demand restraint. But what would you do if 44,000 of your citizens were butchered, while Ivy League elites mourn the monsters who live-streamed their own savagery? Israel delivers the only language its enemies understand: brutal consequences. This is what it takes to dismantle a death cult.
But then the files do get released, and there's nothing that shows that those conspiracies, those claims were wrong. You can't even use conspiracy theories anymore because there have been things called conspiracy theories that turned out to be what we used to call true. So it's all very difficult terrain. But just consider the fact that, you set a hair running like that with the JFK conspiracy, the CIA one. You release all the documents. President Trump releases all the documents. And I don't know if any minds have been changed.
Right. That's
a good, small example of the trust deficit which we're all in.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, I think there are many things that need reform, but I don't believe burn it down is any more a useful way to talk about the justice system than it is to say, talk about the police in those ways, as the radical left did in 2020. It's a very worrying moment for people. But then, as I always console myself, it's always been a worrying moment.
Yeah, worrying moments seem to be thick on the ground. Talking about this, one of the things that I find, I mean, your book is very moving on democracies and death cults, because you went in to Israel and into these places and spoke to the people who were living through what people call everything an existential threat. But the Israelis live through this daily existential threat. It was one of the things in the one trip I've taken there that struck me almost immediately, that you could stand on a hill and look into countries that wanted this entire country wiped off the face of the earth. Just an amazing experience. But the book is very touching because you're talking to these people. And I wonder if you could just address some of the mythologies that certainly the left has spread, and now people on the right are spreading, that Israel is an apartheid state, it's a colonizer, it's committing genocide in Gaza, which would be funny if we're talking about genocide.
Trust vanishes like smoke, files drop, minds don't. Murray's right, the JFK dump didn't heal squat. Public trust in US government sits at 22%. Burn it down, idiotic. Ask cities that tried defund. 2020 to 2021 murders jumped 30%. Meanwhile, Israel stares down literal death cults, genocide. UN puts Gaza deaths near 34,000, about 1%. Not Rwanda's 800,000 in 3 months. When did facts become optional?
and that it's to blame somehow for the Palestinians' troubles. I mean, what is, as you see it, the general state of this country at this moment and in history?
You can always tell somebody hasn't thought about the region at all if they think anything about it is simple.
Yeah.
There was a prominent figure, actually, who used to be the head of MI6, Secret Intelligence Service in the UK, who gave an interview the other day to CNN, in which he referred to the recent apparent massacres and unrest inside Syria, which many people predicted, because when the former jihadist who has taken over the country post-Assad came into power, many people said, well, this crucible of multiple minorities and religious minorities, and it's a veritable Jurassic Park of religions, Syria. But this person who used to be head of the SIS in the UK said, and then there's the Druze that are being attacked, and they're Muslims. And I thought, wow, how amazing that somebody in that position would think that the Druze were Muslim. But that's because they're one of the groups, the religions that are being attacked at the moment inside Syria. It's a reminder of the fact that, the complexity of the region is so extraordinary that people who are meant to be very, very serious people misunderstand very basic things. At the same time, there are certain parts of it which are quite straightforward, which is the State of Israel came into existence in 1948. And the Arabs, as they were called at the time, before they were called Palestinians, were also offered a state by the UN, and they rejected it. And from 1948, the attitude of Israel's neighbors, and indeed of what came the Palestinians, has been, we would rather destroy the Jewish state than have another state of our own.
The Middle East? Simple. Idiots. In 1948, the UN offered two states. Israel grabbed it. Arabs chose to wipe it out. 5 wars later, Israel is booming, while Palestinians waste billions of dollars on terror. Result: since 2008, Gaza terrorists fired over 50,000 rockets at Israelis. Meanwhile, Palestinians starve under Hamas. When will you blame the real culprits? Open your eyes. Murray's dropping truth bombs while the world plays dumb. It's not war, it's Iran's death by 1,000 cuts strategy, funding terror proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah, with over $1 billion annually, according to State Department report. The October 7th attack scaled up. Is 44,000 Americans dead? Suddenly, the armchair generals demanding restraint look like clueless, privileged morons. What would you not do to get 10,000 of your people back?
And that has been the cause of war after war. And that's caused the armies to invade in 67 and 73. After the failure of the 73 attempt to wipe out Israel, the Khomeiniist revolution, of course, came in Iran. One of the reasons I start this book in 1979 is because the flight that took the Ayatollah Khomeini from exile in Paris to Tehran, and then the institution of the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Tehran, should be seen as being maybe the most important development in the region in our lifetimes, because it's that allowed the colonializing Iranian revolutionary government to spread its terror networks across the regions, to take over and dominate countries like Lebanon, increasingly in recent years, as I mentioned, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Gaza, and so on. And they have basically continued that war that the traditional armies stopped after 73, which was the Arabs decided after 1973 they couldn't wipe out Israel by traditional military force like that. But the Iranian revolutionary government recognized that you could perhaps do it if you surrounded Israel with terrorist armies. And on the 7th of October, Hamas, supported by, armed by the Iranian revolutionary government, Qatar, and some others, took their best shot at wiping out Israel, the best shot they'd had since 1973. And they did so in the hope that Hezbollah, another one of Iran's armies, this one in Lebanon, would join in the attack from the north, not just with rocket fire, but similarly invade so that Hamas would come up from the south, Hezbollah would come up from the north, and they'd meet somewhere in the middle, and effectively garrote Israel like that. A lot of people don't realize that that was the ambition. A lot of people still don't realize the scale of the attack. But the people who just accuse Israel wildly, by the way, which they've done since the 8th of October, 2023, the people who accuse Israel of all of these things, genocide and so on, not only are not looking at the situation in any way truthfully, and not diagnosing it in any way truthfully, they're also not answering a question which I have put to such people and never had answered adequately, which is, what would you do? What would you do? In population terms, the United States is 340 million people? We don't know, do we? But I mean, something like that.
Something like that.
We don't really know. Yeah. But about that. And Israel is a country of about 9 million people. 1,200 people were massacred in their homes and dancing in the early morning, Nova Party, on the 7th of October, and another 250 taken hostage in Gaza. If you extrapolate that out by population to America, you would have a situation of roughly 44,000 Americans killed in the American homeland in one day, and a further 10,000 Americans abducted and taken hostage and held in tunnels and tortured underground. Tell me in that situation two things. One, whether there's anything you wouldn't do to kill or capture the people who carried out that attack on the American homeland. And secondly, what would you not do to get back your hostages? That you knew were every minute and every hour of every day, now for almost 2 years, the remaining hostages, being held in conditions of such horror. What would you do? And I have yet to hear any serious person, and I mean that, amateur, professional, can be anyone, a write-in competition. How would you achieve those war objectives of punishing your enemies and getting back your hostages? And all I have heard from people since the war began, this particular phase of the war, is things like, you've got to get around to the negotiating table. I think, wow, yes, to assume that Hamas wanted to annihilate Israel, did the most barbaric acts of violence against the Israeli citizenry, filming it as they went, boasting about their depravities, kidnapping people. The idea that they would take them into Gaza, the hostages, including the bodies of dead hostages, because they value those as bartering tools as well. The idea that on October the 8th, you could then appeal to the humanity of Hamas is so preposterous, and yet serious or formerly serious people actually talk like that. In actual fact, the only way you can achieve any of the war aims that Israel had, as America would have if that nightmare scenario unfolded in America, is to wage a war and to win it. And that is actually what, for the last more than 18 months, Israel has been doing. It's extremely difficult, particularly in Gaza, because of the buildup of the tunnel networks and the weapons dumps and the whole terrorist infrastructure which Hamas built up in Gaza after the withdrawal by the Israelis in 2005. They have made Gaza the hardest place on earth to fight a door-to-door campaign with an effort, as the Israelis have, to minimize civilian casualties, in the same way that the American, US, and British armed forces, when involved in operations, have to try to minimize civilian casualties, quite rightly. They've done that. It's not finished, sadly. Everyone wants it over as soon as possible. There's not one Israeli soldier who wants to spend another hour in Gaza. I can assure you of that. But the Israelis have, in the period since October the 7th, almost completely decimated Hamas, to the extent that its rule in Gaza is on a knife's edge all the time now. They have got most of the hostages back. They have killed almost all the leadership of Hamas. They have decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon. to the extent that Lebanon actually has a chance as a country to survive without Hezbollah throttling it all the time from the government level downwards. The Assad regime has fallen in Syria, partly because Iran's proxies were so decimated everywhere else that they fell apart inside Syria as well. They have taken out, the Israelis, all the air defenses of the Iranian revolutionary government. They have destroyed most of the weaponry, including the ballistic missiles that the Iranian government has been stockpiling. They have destroyed the nuclear program, which the Ayatollahs were, without doubt, despite the claims of some people from the right now, that they were without doubt developing in order to develop the world's most dangerous weapon, a nuclear bomb. The Iranian regime is holding on again on a knife edge. The Houthis in Yemen, who couldn't do anything on their own, but who've been given all these ballistic missiles from Iran, are increasingly cut off and incapable of acting. I wonder sometimes,
Negotiate with savages who live-streamed their depravity. Israel chose war, not wishes. Now Hamas is gutted. Its 300-mile terror tunnel network, according to the IDF estimate, is rubble. Hezbollah is crippled, and Iran's nuclear toys are scrap metal. The Assad regime even crumbled from the fallout. The West writes checks for peace. Israel delivers actual consequences. So, remind me, who's bringing real stability to this hellscape?
If Yahya Sinwar, who planned the October 7th massacre, could have foreseen all of this, would he have done it? You don't know, of course, among other things, because he's dead, and also because he was a psychopath. But I say at one point in On Democracies and Death Cults, when I got the news that Sinwar had been killed by the IDF in Gaza, I went into Gaza the next day to visit the place where he'd met his end. And I mention, as you know, at one point in the book, I sat down in the armchair he was killed in because I wanted to see what he'd seen at the end of his time on this earth. And outside in Rafah was what is without doubt a scene of utter devastation. Not a house that was undamaged, a scene of rubble where the civilian population had all had to evacuate. At the end of his life on this earth, Yahya Sinwar was sitting alone, and he had the chance to look out of the window, and this is what he had achieved in his life. What a stupid, wicked thing to do with the gift of life. And I would just add to that, of course, imagine being one of these young adults. We often talk about campuses. I dislike it in a way because most people in America, thank God, don't go to Ivy League universities. But and I don't like giving them the Ivy Leaguers more attention than they deserve. But imagine being one of these dolts at Princeton or Columbia or Yale who actually celebrated Yahya Sinwar and then mourned his death. Imagine being one of the people who knew of Hassan Nasrallah years afterwards, after he had killed hundreds of American troops in the Beirut bombings in the 80s, after killing hundreds of allies of ours. Imagine that this man who said that his life's work would be to show that he loved death more than the Jews and the other infidel loved life, and he would use that against all of us non-Islamists. Imagine that you discovered that man before he was then killed by an IAF missile in Beirut. Imagine you discovered that man and you thought he was your guy. And then when he died, you thought he was my guy. This is one of the most appalling moral crossroads a person could be at. And there are plenty of chest-beating, pseudo-tough guys on social media and so on who like to say things like, how can you justify what the IDF is doing in Gaza? I say very easily, actually, because I've seen it all. I've seen it all up close. I've seen how it works. I've seen the devastation. I've seen the army's attempt to respond to the devastation. But I think that the question, a much bigger question, which of course is not asked as much, is simply how could so many people who thought that they were the good guys have ended up being the supporters of the worst Islamo-fascist tyrants of our time? And will the people who ended up on that side ever notice the horrific moral error that they committed? There is one sign that they might, which is they might notice at some point that all the guys they were hottest for are 6 feet underground, if not a lot deeper.
Yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, Ivy League morons mourn this monster, the same clowns idolizing Nasrallah, who murdered 241 US service members in Beirut. So, any thoughts on what Douglas Murray just discussed? Share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you never miss any of our future debates.